The planet of Varnus was not like Earth. The air smelled different, the sky was a strange shade of purple, and the land was scattered with towering rock formations and strange glowing plants. It was a world at war. Humans had joined an alliance with several alien species to fight back against a common enemy. The Crexians, a ruthless alien race bent on destroying everything in their path. In the middle of this struggle stood Captain Ethan Black, a soldier in the United Earth Federation. He had been chosen for his skills in battle, his calm under pressure, and his unwavering belief that humans could stand beside any alien race as equals. He was tall, strong, and always ready to fight for what was right. Ethan stood at the edge of the battlefield, his helmet tucked under his arm, his eyes scanning the horizon. The battle was about to begin, and he could feel the tension in the air. But it wasn't just the battle that had him on edge. It was Lady Elira. She was the leader of the Varnisian forces, a fierce alien warrior whose race had once ruled the galaxy. She was known for her strength, her sharp mind, and her beauty, but it was her pride that often made her difficult to work with, especially when it came to humans. Elira had always looked down on humans, believing them to be weak compared to her own species. She saw them as mere soldiers to be led, not as equals in the grand scheme of things. And this attitude had only gotten worse since the war began. Ethan had encountered Elira before. They had fought side by side on several occasions, but her harsh words had always stung. He could handle the insults, of course. He was a soldier, trained to endure. But today was different. As the two forces gathered to prepare for the battle, Elira approached Ethan, her expression unreadable. She stood, tall, her armor shining in the dim light, her weapons gleaming at her sides. She was a sight to behold, and for a moment Ethan was struck by her presence. "Captain Black," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "I don't understand why humans are still here. You have no place in this war. You are nothing compared to us, and yet, you continue to fight like you matter." The words hit Ethan hard. He had grown used to alien insults, but hearing them from Elira, someone he respected despite their differences, was a blow to his pride. He could feel the anger rising within him, but he forced it down. He was a professional and he had a mission to complete. Still, he couldn't help but feel the sting of her words. He had always believed in the potential of humans, in their ability to rise above expectations and prove themselves. But Elira didn't see it that way. Instead of responding, Ethan took a deep breath and reached for his armor. It was heavy, made for combat, and it had saved his life more times than he could count. He slipped it on without a word, his movements steady and precise. Elira watched him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You think putting on that armor will change the fact that you are weaker than the rest of us?" she asked, her voice laced with disdain. Ethan paused. The words hung in the air, and for a moment he considered what she had said. He had spent so much of his life trying to prove his worth to others, trying to show that humans were capable of greatness, just like any other species. But the weight of her words made him question it all. Did he really need this armor? Did he need to constantly prove himself to everyone, even to those who looked down on him? In a sudden moment of clarity, Ethan made a decision. He set the armor down. He stood tall without it, his posture confident and strong. Elira's eyes widened, in surprise. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "You need that armor to survive this battle. Do you want to die?" Ethan looked her directly in the eyes. "I don't need this armor to fight," he said quietly. "I don't need anyone's approval to know that I'm capable." Elira stared at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was used to seeing soldiers ready for battle, armored and armed to the teeth. But this was different. She had never seen a human so sure of themselves, so unafraid to stand without the protection of their armor. It made her uneasy. The others around them began to notice the change. Some whispered, unsure of what to make of Ethan's decision. He wasn't the only human here, but he was the only one who had taken off his armor. The sight of a soldier willingly walking into battle unprotected was unheard of. Elira's gaze softened for just a moment, but it quickly hardened again. She turned away, saying nothing. The battle was about to begin, and she had no time to deal with Ethan's foolishness. But deep down, something stirred within her. There was something about Ethan that intrigued her, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Ethan, on the other hand, felt a sense of freedom he hadn't experienced before. The weight of his armor was gone, and with it, the constant need to prove himself to everyone. In that moment, he realized that he didn't need to fight for the approval of others. He fought because it was the right thing to do, because he believed in the cause, and because he knew deep down that humans had just as much right to be part of this war as anyone else. As he walked away from Elira, he knew that he had made the right choice. He was no longer bound by the expectations of others. The battle ahead would be difficult, but he was ready, armor or no armor. The battlefield lay ahead, filled with the sounds of battle preparations. Soldiers gathered, readying their weapons and positioning themselves for the coming war. Ethan stood apart from the others, his helmet still in his hands. His decision to leave behind his armor had created a stir among both the human and alien soldiers. Some of them watched him curiously, others with confusion. But Ethan paid them no mind. He had made his choice. He could hear Elira's voice in his head, echoing the words she had said to him earlier. She had always seen humans as lesser beings, as though their strength and resilience could never compare to her own. Ethan didn't know if her words had been meant to provoke him, or if she truly believed them. Either way, they had struck a nerve. As he stood there, his arms crossed over his chest, Ethan began to think about all the battles he had fought in his life. He had always been taught that strength came from the outside, through armor, through weapons, through the physical protection that made soldiers feel invincible. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that real strength didn't come from the metal and fire that surrounded him. It came from within. It came from the will to fight, to protect, and to stand tall even when everything around you told you to fall. He had spent so much of his life trying to show others that humans were capable of greatness. But what if the greatness didn't need to be proven? What if he could fight without needing to constantly prove that humans belonged here, on the same level as the other species? His thoughts were interrupted as Elira approached, her footsteps strong and purposeful. She stopped in front of him, her eyes narrowing as she looked him over. Despite her imposing presence, Ethan noticed the uncertainty in her gaze. She was not used to seeing someone like him, someone who seemed to be unaffected by the pressures that came with war, someone who didn't fear standing alone. Ethan didn't say anything right away. He simply stood there waiting for her to speak. For a moment it seemed like she might turn away, but instead she spoke in a low voice. "You're making a mistake, human," Elira said, her tone sharp but not as cruel as it had been before. "You cannot fight without your armor. You will be killed out there." Ethan didn't flinch at her words. He had heard worse on the battlefield. He could handle her harshness. But this time it was different. There was something else in her voice, a hint of concern maybe? He couldn't be sure. "I don't need armor to fight," he said, his voice steady. "And I'm not doing it for you or anyone else. I'm doing it for myself. Because I believe in this cause, because I believe in what we're fighting for." Elira stared at him for a long time as if weighing his words. Ethan could see the tension in her face, the way her jaw tightened as if she was trying to understand what was happening. Her race had always valued strength and pride. She had been raised to believe that only the strongest deserved to lead. But here was a human, someone she had always dismissed as weaker, standing before her without armor yet exuding a quiet strength that she couldn't ignore. "You think that your courage will save you?" she asked, her voice softer now, though still filled with skepticism. "You're not the only one here who believes in this cause, Captain. The others are armed and prepared. What difference does it make if you're unprotected? You'll only end up dead." Ethan could see that her pride was speaking. She didn't like the idea that a human might stand beside her, unafraid and unbowed, without the same weapons and protection that the other soldiers relied on. It wasn't about strength anymore. It was about something deeper, something that Elira, despite her power, didn't fully understand. "I've fought in enough battles to know that armor doesn't make the warrior," Ethan replied. "It's the will to fight. That's what separates those who survive from those who don't. You can wear all the armor you want, but if you don't have the heart, if you don't have the courage to face the enemy, then it doesn't matter how much protection you have. It's just metal. Illyra was quiet for a moment, and Ethan could tell that his words were making an impact. The harshness in her expression softened slightly, though she still seemed unwilling to fully acknowledge. You're different from the others," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand why." Ethan didn't know how to answer that. He wasn't sure himself why he had made this decision, why he had chosen to walk away from the armor and face the enemy without the protection that everyone else relied on. But there was something inside him, a feeling, a belief that this was the right choice. "I guess you'll have to figure that out for yourself," he said with a small smile. "But in the meantime, I'm not backing down. I'll fight beside you and the others, whether I'm in armor or not." Illyra looked at him for a long time, her gaze unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like she might say something more, but then she simply nodded as if accepting his decision, though still unsure of what it meant. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone on the battlefield. As the battle loomed closer, Ethan's resolve only grew stronger. He had made his choice. Now, all that was left was to prove that he didn't need armor to be a hero. He didn't need anyone's approval to fight. He was fighting for what he believed in, and that was enough. And somewhere in the distance, Illyra watched him go, wondering if she had underestimated the human after all. The battle had been fierce. The sky was filled with explosions and flashes of light as both sides clashed in the war for Varnus. Ethan had fought without his armor, his movements quick and agile, relying on his instincts and the strength of his will. He had avoided enemy fire with ease, using the terrain to his advantage, and his decisions had saved lives. But as the hours passed, the exhaustion began to set in. Ethan's mind raced, his thoughts on the mission. The goal was simple: defeat the Crexian forces and protect the Alliance. But he had never felt so much pressure in his life. Every moment counted. Every decision could mean life or death. He had to make sure that he and his comrades made it through the day. As the fighting intensified, Ethan noticed Illyra in the distance, leading her Varnesian forces with the same strength and precision he had come to expect from her. She moved, with grace, her weapons flashing as she cut through the enemy ranks. But there was something different about the way she fought today. She was focused, but there was a hesitation in her movements, a subtle uncertainty that wasn't there before. Ethan's eyes narrowed. He had seen this before. It wasn't just the battle that was on her mind, it was him. Her eyes would occasionally dart to him as if she was trying to figure him out. Her pride had always kept her distant, but now, it seemed like she was trying to understand why he fought the way he did. She had questioned him before, but now it was clear that she was paying attention. As the battle continued, Illyra's path brought her closer to Ethan. She didn't speak at first, but the tension between them was palpable. She seemed to be thinking about something, her thoughts clouded with confusion. Finally, after a long pause, she spoke. "You're different," Illyra said, her voice quieter than before. "Why?" Ethan looked at her, his eyes meeting hers. He could see the change in her. Her usual confidence was replaced by curiosity. She was no longer looking down on him or dismissing him. She was searching for answers. "I told you before," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I fight because I believe in it. Not because of the armor, not because of the weapons. It's about what's inside, what's in your heart." Illyra's expression softened, but she still seemed unsure. She glanced around at the chaos of the battlefield, her gaze falling on the soldiers around them. "And you think that's enough? To just believe?" Ethan nodded. "Sometimes that's all you need. Belief in yourself, in your cause, and in the people around you. It's more than the armor, Illyra. It's about what you do when everything else falls away." Illyra was silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Ethan could see the conflict inside her. She was a warrior, proud and unyielding. But now she was questioning everything she had ever known. Her people had always been taught to rely on strength, on weapons, on armor, on power. But what Ethan was saying was something completely different. It was a new way of looking at things, one that she didn't know how to accept. For a long time, Alira had believed that the strongest were the ones who survived. Her race, the Varnesians, had always prided themselves on their physical strength and their advanced technology. But now, standing beside Ethan, someone who had proven himself in battle without relying on the same things she had always believed in, she was beginning to doubt everything she had been taught. "I don't understand," she admitted. "How can you fight without armor, without the things that make you strong? How can you survive out there without the things that protect you?" Ethan turned his gaze toward the battlefield. He could feel the weight of her words, but he had an answer. "I don't need to be protected by armor, Alira. I fight because I know what's worth fighting for. I fight because I care about the people around me, because I want to see this war end, and because I want to protect those who can't protect themselves." Alira was quiet for a long time, her gaze lingering on the chaos unfolding before them. Ethan could tell that she was still processing what he had said. She had always believed that warriors were those who could survive the battle, who could defeat the enemy, and come out victorious. But now, she was beginning to understand that true strength wasn't just about winning. It was about the willingness to fight, the willingness to risk everything for the greater good, and the courage to face the hardest challenges without fear. "I always thought strength was about power," Alira said softly. "About defeating the enemy, about having the ability to crush anyone who stands in your way. But now, I don't know. I don't know what to think." Ethan smiled slightly, his expression gentle. "It's not easy to change the way you see things. It's something you have to learn for yourself." Alira looked at him, and for the first time, she saw him not as just a soldier, not just a human, but as someone who had something she had never truly understood: the ability to fight without fear, to face danger head-on without relying on the things that made others feel safe. He was vulnerable, yes, but that vulnerability gave him a strength that she couldn't ignore. "Maybe," she said quietly. "I need to learn that too." Ethan's smile widened, and for a moment the two of them stood there side by side, watching the battle unfold before them. The war was far from over, and there would be more challenges ahead. But for the first time, Alira felt something shift inside her. Maybe strength wasn't about what you had on the outside. It was about what you held inside. As the sounds of the battle roared around them, Alira made a decision. She would fight not just for her people, but for something bigger. She would fight with the same belief that Ethan carried, the belief that they were all in this together and that together they could survive anything. The sun began to set over Varnus, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The fight was far from over, but the air had shifted. The alien Crexian forces were relentless, pushing hard against the combined strength of the humans and Varnesians. Yet, despite the growing pressure, Ethan and Alira had found an unexpected peace in their shared understanding. As the battle raged on, Ethan moved through the chaos, his movements smooth and quick, dodging Crexian attacks and protecting his fellow soldiers. He had no armor, no weapon beyond his combat knife, but his focus was sharper than ever. It was the first time he truly felt free. There was nothing holding him back, not the weight of his armor, not the pressure of others' expectations. He fought because it was the right thing to do, and nothing else mattered. Alira, meanwhile, led her people with renewed purpose. She had always been a strong leader, but now she fought with a deeper conviction. Her actions were quicker, more decisive. She moved with grace, her every strike precise, her every command clear. But it was more than just strength that guided her now. She felt the weight of Ethan's words, his belief in fighting for the cause, for each other, and for what was right. Still, the war was not over. The Crexians had launched a final assault, sending their largest warship into the heart of the Yash battle. The ship loomed in the sky, a dark, menacing shadow against the fading sunlight. The Crexians had shown no mercy before, and it was clear they would stop at nothing to claim victory. "We need to take that ship down before it can fire on the cities," Alira said, her voice full of determination. She turned to Ethan, her eyes meeting his for a moment. "We can't let them win." Ethan nodded, his face serious. "We'll do it. But we need a plan. We can't just rush in without knowing what we're up against." Elira's eyes hardened. She had never been one to wait for orders, but she knew that Ethan was right. This wasn't just about strength. It was about strategy. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. The two of them met with their commanders and quickly began to formulate a plan. They would need to work together, combining their skills and knowledge to take down the Crexian warship. But Elira knew there was more at stake than just the ship. They were fighting for survival, not just for their worlds, but for their very way of life. As the plan came together, Ethan and Elira found themselves side by side, their focus entirely on the mission ahead. There was no room for doubt, no time for hesitation. The battle was approaching its climax, and they had to give everything they had to stop the Crexians. The final assault began just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the battlefield in darkness. The Crexian warship fired its first blast, a powerful beam of energy that tore through the sky. Narrowly missing the ground forces, the shockwave of the blast sent soldiers scrambling for cover. Elira's voice rang out over the chaos. "Take cover. Move quickly," she shouted, rallying her troops. Ethan was already on the move, heading toward the warship. His every step was calculated, his mind focused. He was not afraid. The earlier doubts he had felt seemed far away now. He was doing what needed to be done, and that was enough. Elira, too, pressed forward, cutting through the enemy ranks with precision. She was more than just a warrior now, she was a leader, driven by a sense of duty to her people and to the cause. She had come to understand what Ethan had been trying to teach her, that true strength was not about armor or weapons. It was about the courage to fight for what was right. The plan they had crafted was a risky one. They had to disable the Crexian warship's weapon systems before it could fire again. To do so, they would need to infiltrate the ship's command center, a task that would require both stealth and strength. As the two forces clashed, Ethan and Elira made their way toward the warship, moving in sync, their focus unwavering. They fought side by side, a united front against the overwhelming odds. With every strike, with every move, they grew more and more in tune with each other. Their bond had deepened over the course of the battle, and now it felt as if they could anticipate each other's actions without speaking. When they reached the warship's outer perimeter, Elira turned to Ethan. "We make a final push," she said, her voice low but resolute. "Stay close." Ethan nodded, ready for whatever came next. The final part of the plan was the most dangerous. They would need to breach the warship's defenses and disable the weapon systems from the inside. It was a task that could cost them their lives, but it was the only way to ensure the Crexians couldn't destroy everything they had fought for. Elira led the charge, her agility and strength cutting through the last of the Crexian forces guarding the entrance to the ship. Ethan followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. They reached the door, and Elira wasted no time in overriding the security system. The door hissed open, and the two of them stepped inside. The ship's corridors were dark, the air heavy with the smell of burning metal and the sounds of distant alarms. They moved quickly, knowing that time was running out. As they reached the control room, they found themselves face to face with the Crexian commander, a tall, imposing figure standing at the helm of the ship's systems. The commander sneered at them, but Elira and Ethan were undeterred. Together, they fought with everything they had. The battle inside the warship was short but intense. Elira's strength and Ethan's quick thinking allowed them to overpower the Crexian commander. With a final strike, the commander fell, and the weapon systems were disabled. The warship's engines sputtered and died, its weapons failing to fire. The threat was over. They had won. As they made their way back to the battlefield, Ethan and Elira shared a quiet look. There was no need for words. The mission had been completed. The war had not been won yet, but this was a significant victory, and as the two of them stood together surrounded by the sounds of the battle fading, Elira realized something that she had never truly understood before. The battle had never been about the weapons. It had always been about the people who fought for something bigger than themselves. The dust from the battle had barely settled when Ethan and Elira stood among the wreckage of the Crexian warship. The enormous ship, once a looming threat, now lay in ruins, a symbol of the combined forces that had overcome it. The air was thick, with the smell of burnt metal, and the ground was littered with the debris of fallen enemies. Elira stood with her back straight, her expression stoic as she surveyed the scene. Her people had won, but the victory felt hollow. Too many lives had been lost on both sides. As a leader, she knew the cost of war all too well, but this time, something had changed within her. She had fought differently, alongside Ethan without her pride or her armor, and it had been the most difficult and rewarding battle of her life. Ethan, standing beside her, was silent, his gaze shifting from the battlefield to the horizon. He had done what he set out to do, but there was no sense of celebration. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over, and even though they had achieved their goal, he couldn't shake the weight of the losses they had endured. As the soldiers began to gather and assess the damage, Elira turned to him. She had been thinking about their time together on the battlefield, about what they had learned from each other. There was a new respect between them now, a mutual understanding that had never existed before. But even with that, the war was far from over, and there was a part of her that still couldn't fully grasp what Ethan had shown her, the way he fought without fear or hesitation, without the armor and protection that everyone else relied on. It was something that made her question everything she thought she knew. "You were right," Elira said quietly, breaking the silence. "I see now what you meant. Strength isn't just about weapons and armor, it's about belief, about fighting for something greater than yourself." Ethan turned to look at her, a small smile on his lips. "You've come a long way, Elira. It wasn't easy, but you figured it out." Elira nodded, her eyes clouded with the weight of what had just happened. "I never thought I'd fight like this. I never thought I'd fight with humans. But now I'm starting to understand what it means to fight alongside someone, not just for victory, but for each other." Ethan's expression softened. "We all have something worth fighting for. You just have to find it." They stood together for a moment, watching as the soldiers continued their work, removing the fallen, tending to the wounded, and securing the area. Elira's mind drifted back to the earlier moments of the battle, when she had seen Ethan's bravery firsthand. He had fought without armor, without any external protection, yet his courage had been a force in itself. He had risked everything, not for glory or fame, but for the people around him. The realization hit Elira harder than she expected. She had been so focused on the idea of strength, on proving that her people were the strongest, the most capable. But strength, she now understood, was something deeper. It wasn't about crushing your enemies, it was about standing firm when everything seemed to be falling apart. It was about giving everything for the greater good, even when the odds were against you. As the evening drew closer, Elira and Ethan walked toward the command center where the remaining leaders were gathering. The damage had been severe, but the Crexians were retreating, their forces shattered. The battle was over, but there would be more to come. When they arrived, the commanders of the human and Varnisian forces stood waiting. There were no words of celebration, no cheering. Everyone knew that the war was not won with just one victory. There was still much to be done, but there was something different in the air. The soldiers no longer saw Ethan as just a human soldier. They saw him as a warrior, someone who had fought with honor and courage, someone who had earned his place among the strongest of them all. And Elira, once the proud and distant leader, had come to see Ethan as more than just a soldier. She saw him as a partner, someone who had taught her the true meaning of strength. As they gathered in the command center, the Varnisian leader turned to Elira. "We have won this battle, but we cannot afford to relax. The Crexians will return, stronger than ever. We need to prepare for the next phase." Elira nodded, but her gaze lingered on Ethan. She was no longer the same warrior who had first crossed paths with him. She had learned from him, and now she understood what it meant to fight not just with strength but with purpose. Her people had always relied on their power, but now she saw that true strength was in unity, in belief, and in standing together for what was right. "We will prepare," Elira said, her voice steady and confident. "But we will do it together. We will fight together, and we will win." The commanders exchanged glances, unsure at first, but the decision was made. There was no turning back. The alliance between humans and Varnisians was stronger than ever, and Elira knew that, with Ethan by her side, they could face whatever came next. As they left the command center, Ethan and Elira stood together once more. There was still so much ahead of them, so many battles to fight. But for the first time, Elira felt a sense of peace in her heart. The road would be difficult, but she no longer feared the unknown. She had learned that true strength was not just in the battles you won, but in the courage to keep fighting no matter the cost. "We've got a long way to go," Ethan said, his voice quiet but strong. Elira smiled, her gaze meeting his. "I know, but we'll face it together. And that's enough." As the stars began to appear in the night sky above them, the two of them stood side by side, ready for whatever came next. They had come through the storm, and now they were stronger for it. Together, they would face whatever challenges the universe had in store. The stars above Varnus sparkled like 1,000 tiny jewels scattered across the night sky. The battle had ended, but the war was far from over. Yet in the quiet moments following their hard-fought victory, Ethan and Elira found themselves standing together, each lost in their thoughts but united in a new understanding. The days after the battle had been filled with the work of rebuilding. The battlefield was being cleared, the wounded tended to, and the fallen honored. Soldiers from both the human and Varnesian forces worked side by side, their cooperation a symbol of the unity that had been forged in the fire of battle. Elira stood on a raised platform, looking over the city they had just saved. The Varnesian people were grateful, but the tension was still in the air. The Crexians had not given up. The war was still ongoing, and the alliances they had formed would soon be tested. But Elira had changed. She had seen a new way of fighting, and for the first time she felt the true weight of leadership. It wasn't about showing strength alone. It was about showing humanity, about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Ethan stood beside her, his eyes following her gaze. It was hard for him to feel fully at peace, knowing that the war was not over. But in these quiet moments, there was a sense of accomplishment, a feeling that they had made a difference. His time on the battlefield without his armor had taught him more than he ever expected. He had learned that strength was not just physical, it was about heart, about standing firm when everything around you threatened to break. "Do you think it's enough?" Elira asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding. "For today, it is. But tomorrow we fight again. That's how it is. We fight because it's the right thing to do, not because we expect anything in return." Elira nodded, turning to face him. There was a quiet respect between them now, something that hadn't been there before. It was not just the respect of soldiers who had fought side by side, but the respect of people who had learned from one another, who had seen past their differences and understood what it meant to stand together. "What now?" Elira asked, her voice filled with a new uncertainty. Ethan smiled slightly. "Now we rebuild. We make sure the peace we fought for holds, and we keep fighting until the war is won." Elira's eyes flickered with a mixture of emotions. She had never expected to find a true ally in a human. She had always seen them as inferior, as beings that would never be able to keep up with the strength of her people. But now she saw Ethan differently. He had shown her what it meant to fight with heart, to fight for something greater than just survival. She had learned that the strength of the human spirit could outshine even the strongest armor. "We've come a long way," Elira said quietly. "I never thought I'd be standing here, fighting beside a human." Ethan chuckled softly. "Neither, did I? But I'm glad we're doing it." Elira smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made her look softer, less guarded. She had always carried the weight of leadership on her shoulders, the burden of pride and honor that came with her position. But now she felt lighter. She had learned that strength didn't always come from power. Sometimes it came from vulnerability, from being willing to stand with others and fight together. As they stood there side by side, they knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with new challenges and battles, but they also knew that they weren't alone anymore. They had each other, and they had the support of their people. Together, they would face whatever the future held. A new alliance. The days turned into weeks, and the alliance between the humans and Varnesians grew stronger. The Crexian forces had retreated, but they were not gone. The threat remained, and the time for rebuilding was quickly turning into a time for preparation. The alliance had to remain strong, their resolve unshaken. Ethan had become a hero among the humans, his actions on the battlefield without armor inspiring those who had once doubted their ability to stand against the stronger alien races. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a symbol of the human spirit, of what it meant to fight with courage and honor. Elira, too, had earned the respect of her people. Her leadership, tempered with newfound humility, had brought a sense of unity to the Varnesian forces. She had learned that true power came from understanding, from working together, not just from defeating enemies. Her people saw her in a new light, and she had proven that she could lead them to a better future. As the days passed, the alliance began to solidify. The leaders of the human and Varnesian forces met regularly to plan their next moves, working together as equals. They knew that the Crexians would return, but they also knew that they were stronger together than they had ever been apart. The war was far from over, but for the first time, there was hope. Elira and Ethan had forged a bond that would carry them through the darkest days ahead. Their alliance was no longer just one of necessity, it was one of choice. They had chosen to stand together, to fight together, and to face whatever challenges the universe threw their way. As Elira looked out over the horizon, she knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but with Ethan by her side, and with the strength of their united people, she was ready for whatever came next. "We've got this," Elira said, her voice filled with a quiet confidence. Ethan nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, we do." And as the stars above them twinkled in the vast expanse of space, Elira and Ethan stood side by side, ready to face whatever the future held, together.